Good day, my friends. Time to animate. Hope you liked the speed paint that I posted actually earlier today at the time that I'm recording this. The next shot, well, let's just say this. If you did not see the previous shot, then I'll just recap it here real quick. We kind of have this sequence where Mel's thinking about what he's going to do. He says, he'll never miss it. Comes along here, stuffs the clothing into the tree. Says, he says, that's that. Job well done. And then Asher comes up and, well, Melchizedek. Okay, so in real time, this is what that looks like. Well, that's that. Job well done. Melchizedek. Okay. So there's a few things. I'm sure I'll probably wait a while and come back to this shot. But there are a few things about it that I think could be better. Just at a glance, it does seem like there's maybe some color correction required and blah, blah, blah. So no big deal. Okay, so now before we get into animation today, I want to look at a painting I painted just actually yesterday on Christmas Day. I started on Christmas Eve, finished it on Christmas Day, and I want to show it because on the one hand, of course, I want to show off my painting, just because it's a bit of a divergence from what I normally do here, but also there's a couple interesting lessons I learned with it. So here's the painting. Boom. Okay. And I feel it was successful. This is not digital, by the way. This is actually real paint. But the thing I found really fun and interesting about this painting is that if you get, I guess you can't shrink this down, is that right? You can zip it up, but you can't shrink it down. Let me drag it into Krita so we can do this a little different way. And we'll just insert that as a document. Okay, so what I found was really interesting was if you look at it like this, in other words, if you're standing 20 feet across the room, it really pops. I mean, not saying it looks photoreal because frankly I wouldn't want it to look photoreal. I don't tend to like photorealism. What I like is kind of the mentality of the old school matte painters, which was that in point of fact, if you go in close, you see that it's actually very impressionistic, very much just blobs of color. And you see how very simple it is. Yet, when you really zoom out, you see it looks closer to photographic. And that dichotomy between close and far is what I find really interesting. It makes a painting, let's call it rich, because there's always more and more stuff to sort of be discovered in the painting. And just for the record, I will say this too. In real life, it actually looks better than it does here in this photo I took of it, because the colors here are actually a little overly saturated. In real life, I can't even believe I did this either. I'm not quite sure how I did it. Because if you look at the mishmash of colors that are in the coat, surprisingly, in real life, as I'm looking at it right now, the overall tan cast of the coat looks very accurate, even though when you look close, you see that it's not at all. It's just a bunch of blobs. Now, how can we take this and apply it to our animation? Well, when you're blocking in the animation, it's kind of funny because this applies to composing music too. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it applies to animation. It obviously applies to painting. But the idea is that, as I've said many times on this channel, you work from the known to the unknown. In this shot, I actually started out with this. And I said to myself, well, where's he going to start from though? And so then I drew this because I do want to have him from behind. And then the idea was that he's going to just turn around. So working out the timing, you'll notice, and by the way, this layer can probably be turned off now. That was sort of my guide from the storyboard. Okay, but you'll notice his hair in this shot. It's just a blob. It's just a shape. Okay, and it might not be perfect. Could be we want to add a little bit of little volume to it in front. Okay, but what you'll find is if you allow yourself to work with these very simple, again, working from the known to the unknown. I know I need this little jutted in area in his hair, so let's just get that in there. This is going to kind of move from here to here. So he's kind of rising up, just so I'm making a mental note of the fact that his body's actually moving this direction at the moment, which might be a bad thing. Looks like not. So in other words, it's kind of like boom, boom, and his hair actually kind of pushes up and then bounces back down. So that's okay. That looks all right. Okay, so what would we have here? I think we would have something like that. The point is that if you just get the general motion of the broad contours and the overall shapes, if you get that correct, the motion will look okay. So let's play this and you'll see. That's basically what I'm after, and the timing's about right. So while I'm working on this, I want to kind of expand upon one of the creative challenges that goes with this type of work, and it applies again equally well to creating a painting or a piece of music or whatever it is you're doing. Including, by the way, designing a business or engineering a product. The scary thing about a creative endeavor is the same thing that's the scary thing about everything, which is essentially the fear of failure. So it's the idea that, why am I even going to try? You know, because what if it fails? What if it comes out looking sucky? And at least the way my mind works, I know this is highly dysfunctional, but the question you ask yourself is, I'm going to regret having spent the time I spent on it. Could have spent that time better, maybe doing something else, if it turns out to have been a failure. But if it turns out not to be a failure, then I won't feel like that time was wasted. Okay, so what I've learned as an old wise sage that I would like to hope that I'm becoming over time, is that that's a highly dysfunctional way to think, because it's flawed from the outset. And here's why it's flawed. One of the great mistakes that we make is that in order to, well, let's put it this way. How would you hedge against that fear? The way you would probably hedge against that fear is you want to know for a fact that you will succeed. Well, how do you know that you will succeed? Well, you have all of the questions that you're going to bump into along the way answered before you start. If they're answered before you start, then ostensibly you can dive in and know that you're going to succeed. But here's the problem. What you think is the solution to your fear is, in fact, not attainable at all, ever. The idea that you can know the answers in advance is so stunningly misguided that I can't even tell you how misguided it is. By contrast, what you actually discover, and by the way, this also applies to governmental policies and speaks directly to the level of, let's say, what's the word? I guess let's call it contention. The level of contention we have between the parties stems largely from the fact that you have been told that this, let's say, this candidate's policies will result in a very negative outcome for you. Okay? In the presidential election, maybe an example would be Donald Trump. When he was out campaigning, he would tell people quite explicitly, he would say, if Joe Biden gets elected, you will lose your health care. If Joe Biden gets elected, the economy will be the worst we've ever seen in our lifetimes. I mean, he told people this routinely. Okay, now we understand that that's a political strategy. Of course, he's going to try to imbue you with fear because, remember, Occam's razor. The guy wants your vote. So making you very, very afraid. And you see it in the Georgia elections, too. This is why Kelly Loeffler always says, kind of robotically, she always refers to her opponent as radical leftist Raphael Warnock. And she just says radical leftist Raphael Warnock because she wants you to be very, very afraid of leftism or socialism, blah, blah, blah. Again, not commenting on whether her policy choices are right or wrong. I have my own opinions about that, but that's not the point. The point is, this is just a strategy to imbue you with fear because she wants your vote. But how this informs the creative process is that once you're concerned that you're going to fail, i.e., or AKA, politically speaking, if you are afraid you're going to experience a negative outcome for yourself if a certain socio-cultural pathway is taken, then you are what? Afraid. And so you think that the cure to your fear is to have the answers, to know with certainty what the outcomes are going to be. If I could know with certainty what the outcomes would be, especially if, let's say, the election went in a certain direction, or if, say, I were to go ahead and dive into this painting not knowing in advance if I will succeed or fail. The problem is knowing in advance what the outcomes will be, or what even the actually I'm going to duplicate this and change his eyes here. Knowing in advance what the results will be is literally, not figuratively, but literally impossible. No matter how hard you try, you cannot see the invisible incentives that are in place that are going to guide the way it progresses after the policy is implemented. You cannot know. Now, I may, if I keep staying on track here, I may get into how you can mitigate that lack of certainty as well as possible. The way to mitigate it as well as possible is the complete, actually I'll just keep going. Let's continue with the socio-political commentary in looking at how would you mitigate this problem I'm describing. Think about it. If you can't really know in advance what your outcomes will be, then you're working with a body of knowledge, right? Which leads you to the assumptions that you're making. What that suggests is that the single worst thing you could possibly do is close yourself up in an echo chamber with a bunch of people who are like-minded. Because all they're going to do is give you confirmation bias that your prejudices, which if you're leaning right in the cases I've cited already, your prejudices say that indeed, if the leftist candidate gets elected, you'll lose your health care and all the rest. Well, if all you do is surround yourself with other people who have that same fear, then you've done absolutely nothing to put yourself in a better position to evaluate what the outcomes might be and or come to a wiser political decision or, policy concept. So what should you do then? Well, what you actually should do is you should happily seek out people whose political proclivities and whose opinions and whose point of views are actually diametrically opposed to yours. That's what the mature leader does. He seeks out the opposite. He doesn't seek out those who are just going to agree with him. Okay, so you kind of might suspect where I'm heading here. It does underscore some of the things that would certainly appear to be wrong in Trump's world, because it does appear that he is a guy who tends to surround himself with yes men, if you will. And by the way, we're seeing it right now that he rewards those who remain loyal, and it appears that he is also inclined to punish, if possible, those who are not. Some people actually take that interpretation of the recent refusal to sign the stimulus bill. It is a way to punish Mitch McConnell. It's a way to punish everybody in America who didn't vote for him. It would seem quite petty. This is why, if you're going to come up with good policy decisions, it's really best. I hate to put it this way because it's so stupidly simplistic, but it's really best if you're good. If you're good. If the leader is good, I don't usually quote the Bible here, but there is a Bible verse that says the people rejoice when there's a good king. I can't remember what the verse is, but it basically says that when there's a good king, the people rejoice. The idea being that when your leader is manifestly a good guy, or good woman, of course, as the case may be, you tend to have better outcomes generally in your society for all the reasons I'm describing. The very fact that they're good means they're going to seek out the best solutions. And the reason, again, it is axiomatically impossible to know in advance if your policy or your painting or your piece of music or whatever it is will be successful. It literally is the case that the only way you're going to find out is by diving in and trying. And then what happens is, again, you work from the known to the unknown. So what happens is the problems reveal themselves, and then you have to try different ways to solve those problems. That's what you do. And it works. And at the end of the day, the cool thing about that is at the end of the day, it may turn out, whoops, I didn't mean to do that, that the choice you made or the thing you attempted will fail, at least by the standard you set for yourself. In other words, whatever you measure as success, it might turn out you don't quite hit it. And the reason you didn't hit it is because you didn't quite have the tools and techniques in your toolkit to be able to solve the problems that presented themselves. It's really that simple. If you had the skill, you would have gotten the result. Well, ask yourself this simple question. Is there any shortcut to craft or to real skill? No. This is why engineers and scientists kind of have an advantage over the rest of us, because out of the gate, they have a tendency to just clinically appreciate data. They're not looking for a right answer. It's not an emotional thing for them the way it often is for us as artists. They have data at hand, they have an objective, and then they begin to engineer a solution, and again, axiomatically, 100% of the time, with no exceptions, things go wrong. What you initially thought was the answer turns out not to be. And we see this all the time in business. People start businesses all the time, and 3 years later, if they're successful, will tell you that what they found out is what they thought their business was going to be when they started. It wasn't at all, and what actually turned out to be successful was something completely unexpected that just grabbed them from left field, but because it worked, they went with it. Well, this is a very scary thing to think about in terms of politics, because it does suggest, again, that when it comes to policy, getting it right is actually literally impossible. That's why, if you're an ideologue and you're strongly on the left or strongly on the right, here's what you want right now. You want sweeping change. Well, if Darren T's out there listening to this, I think you know that that was what Brexit was. Sweeping change. Except there was one little problem. The problem was that there were a lot of problems that went with the sweeping change. The reality is that the good leader always seeks out small incremental changes, not huge sweeping changes. So the question you might ask yourself is, well, who wants huge sweeping changes? Well, it's the ideologue who has strong tendencies towards one side or the other who is also imbued with fear. There's some outcome they're afraid of that they have come to choose to believe can be assigned to the other side. So the other side represents that outcome that they're terrified of. And they think the solution is sweeping changes. This is something people don't really understand. That's why they don't understand that the gridlock we have in Washington is actually a good thing. Because it represents a tug of war, a negotiation between the two extremes. And it turns out that's when the best policies come into being. But the problem is, it's very boring. It's not glamorous. What's glamorous is a dramatic, almost Hollywood type story. A story that says, if we were to implement this sweeping change, this is all the wonderful things that would accrue to you. These are all the benefits we would acquire. And those stories, 100% of the time, turn out, in hindsight, to be completely wrong. They turn out to always be pretty wrong, but sometimes they turn out to be grossly misguided. And the reason they're misguided is because they're fundamentally flawed from the start, specifically because they only favor one side. They only can favor one side because they're coming from the vantage point of a fearful ideologue. That's why my party, or my political leaning, is what I call alt-center. I lean towards the center because I've come to realize that that's actually where all the wisdom is. And the center is very boring. You don't want to sit in a tense, protracted negotiation between a lefty and a righty trying to craft a bill that they can actually get passed. You don't want to sit and watch that. That's very boring. It takes hours, and it's just a bunch of debate back and forth. If it's civil, you know. Now, if it gets violent, then it's interesting. But that's what we think is interesting. The ideologue who stands out on the podium and tells a story that's mythical and convinces you that that story might actually be true. That's what's interesting. That's what's fun. Problem is, it's Hollywood. It's not reality. The mythical story always, 100% of the time, turns out to be wrong. Well, how does this map back to animation? If you have an idea in your mind of something you want to do, never hesitate to do it because you think you have to figure out the answers first. It won't work. It never works. The only thing that works is trying and discovering along the way what will actually work. And just accept the fact that you cannot, no matter how hard you try. I mean, if you take this as a point of personal philosophy so that you say this is an inviolable rule, you're probably going to be not too far off. Okay? So in other words, you approach it from the standpoint of, well, there's no way I can get this right. So I'm not even going to try. I'm going to just move forward within the context of what I currently know how to do and discover what I don't know and then try different solutions that get me there. Okay, having said that, I think, yeah, we just have to do a little tweak on the timing here, and I think we're in good shape. Hey, Asher. So we're going to put in some lip sync, and then I'll debate whether I want to actually put in this second. Probably what we'll do is just let's keep it simple. So anyway, I think that is going to be my little soapbox for today. We'll do ink and paint later, and hopefully you found it helpful and or inspiring or whatever. And, you know, go work on your own animation now. All right? Talk to you later. There will be